Hello?
There you are.
Yeah, there we go. One way of finding out whether the microphone works is to speak very loudly into it. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I thought we'd wait to start until we had more people in the audience than on the panel, which we have now achieved. So thanks very much for coming along. And welcome to this session looking at sustainability standards in wine. Very pleased to have an extremely good panel this afternoon. But before we start, just a few words about SWR. Sustainable Wine Roundtable is a membership organization with about 80 members drawn from across the wine world, from wineries and producers at one end to providers like cork manufacturers in the middle, standards organizations and retailers. And I think what makes us unique is precisely that we do have the whole of the industry represented. And obviously, as the title suggests, what we do is look at sustainability in wine. And therein you find one of the big problems. What exactly do we mean by sustainability? Is it the environment? Is it people? Is it also including financial stability? Is it all of the above? To try and answer that question over the last few years, there's been a development of a wide range of sustainability standards in wine, which seek to define what sustainability means for wine in different parts of the world and different parts of the value chain. The challenge with that, of course, is that those standards need to answer the needs of quite a lot of different organizations. What do producers need from sustainability standards? What do retailers want from sustainability standards? What do ultimately customers, people like you and me that buy wine, want from these sustainability standards? And so that's what we're going to start looking into today, to try and explore a little bit about what some of the different interests are in sustainability standards and how we take this forward. How do we get to a point where there is an ability to cross-compare between all those different standards? At SWR, we are in the process of doing a benchmarking process to look at all of those different standards, of which, as of yesterday, I'd found 73. I found a 74th yesterday, one looking at sustainability in Bordeaux. So we have got our work cut out. So what I want to try and do with this session is to work with our panel to explore some of the different interests, the different views, the different needs that organizations have from sustainability standards in the hope that we can, over the next few years, come up with a process that can allow comparability between different standards in different parts of the world. So I'm going to go first to Juan Munoz Oca, who is a producer. So what is it that you, as a winemaker, as a grape grower, what do you want standards to do for your organization?
Thank you, Peter. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be here. I want to thank the Sustainable Wine Roundtable for the invitation to be part of this panel. My fellow panelists, it's an honor to be here with you. I think ultimately, as a producer, we need a couple of different things. Perhaps more importantly, we need to have a way to articulate what makes a producer sustainable in the holistic way of being sustainable. So good for the environment, but also for the community where we are, and being financially sustainable for generations to come. So make wine in the same pristine conditions that we're lucky enough to make it today in 50, 100, 300 years. But also, we want to articulate to the consumer our work in sustainability. And so that's when I think entities like the Sustainable Wine Roundtable become a wonderful bridge, so we can not only communicate our work, but make it crystal clear to the consumer that the work that we're doing is important to them, so we can earn their minds and hearts and ultimately their wallets, and they buy our wine versus a wine from a different region, different producer, etc. The beauty of having a standard or our work trying to find a global standard is I work for a company that owns wineries in Washington, Oregon, and California, so the entire west coast of the United States. And we have 7 wineries in Washington and 10 vineyards, 3 wineries in Oregon and 4 vineyards, 3 wineries in Napa with 10 estate vineyards. And these have like very different certifications. Certifications that are even hard for us to articulate to our own employees. Our wineries in Napa are Napa Green. So what does it mean to be Napa Green? What's important about that certification? What sets us apart from the rest of the wineries in Napa? We cannot articulate that to our employees. We cannot articulate that to our retailers. And we need to make this easier so we can start peeking through the greenwashing in the industry and start diving into not only the things that are important to us as producers, but the things that are important to our partners, the distributors, the retailers, and ultimately the consumer. And the part that is interesting is that if we have an issue within our company trying to figure out what the difference between Napa Green, Live in Oregon, or Sustainable Washington in Washington, and how the different sustainability components that are part of those impact the community where we are, it'd be impossible for us to articulate that to the consumer. And so finding common ground, making sure that we can benchmark ourselves to standards that are not only shared through the wine industry globally, but also maybe other industries, which is the part that was really interesting to me about the Sustainable Wine Roundtable, is we have members from other industries that are informing what we do as it relates to winemaking and grape growing. I think all of us should be working towards a future in which unsustainable is unthinkable. Just the way in which you jump in an airplane today and you cannot imagine that somebody was smoking in that airplane not that long ago. It's unthinkable. I'm hoping that as an industry, the wine industry can work towards a place in which unsustainable is unthinkable. I know we have a long way to go, but a great first step for us will be to have a global reference so we can benchmark our work to the work of our competitors, our partners, and ultimately eloquently express what's important about that to the consumer.
I'm going to do the same thing again, aren't I? Yell into it. Thanks, Juan. And Michele, I'm going to come to you next, because you slightly straddle the fence. You're both a producer and involved with Equalitas, which is, for those of you that don't know, the Italian wine standard. So how do you sort of bridge this gulf of, as Juan said, sometimes there being so much complexity and difference between standards that it's difficult even to explain inside the industry, much less externally. How do you see those issues, both with your producer hat on and your Equalitas hat on?
Well, first of all, it seems that we are in front of a similar problem we faced something like 10 years ago in Italy, when particularly I was a producer who made in 2009 what was considered the first carbon footprint of a wine bottle. At the time, there wasn't even an ISO standard, and in fact, when we were estimating this calculation, trying to give a sense to actually to find a rating to what we were doing in our winery toward a challenge of reducing our impact, we understood that the problem couldn't be solved on our own. And so the first move that we made at the time was to put together as many people possible that were working around carbon footprint to create a chart and to say, how can we define a common rule? Otherwise, we will never be able to create the right signs to recognize where to invest as a winery and how to select and differentiate the product as a consumer. This is the main topic, because we are all today more and more conscious that if we want to change society, we need to change business and production and consumption, because this is the phenomenon. If we consider climate change, I remember we made this exercise a few years ago to reclassify GHG emission at the world level, and nearly 56% were issued by everyday product consumption. So it means that if you want to change something, you have to change the way you produce it and the way you consume it. That's the only way we can manage this. So what we did at the time, and I'm very proud to have participated to this process as some kind of a training field in a way, and then consequently as an actor in the govern of this process. It was 2013. we have examined, at the time in Italy, we were examining 15. So now the challenge of the 74, it's normal at the global level. So we had 15 only in Italy to assess in 2013, and to really try to find the common language that Juan was talking about. It's a cultural aspect, but it's also something that needs to go a little bit beyond and become rules, benchmarks, more clear references. Otherwise, the culture is not enough. Even though I can say that what helps us a lot in this is that the generical culture is improving. I like to imagine that we do not only have native digitals coming along in the new generation, but also environmental native, because this is it's a topic that goes more and more. Now, I also think that the problem today is a little bit more complex probably than 10 years ago. 10 years ago, the first players, the first movers were feeling a little bit abandoned by the community. The market was not really interested, the lawmakers either, even though only the news, only the media were interested to that topic. The generical media were talking a lot about this, but that's it. So we were really talking among ourselves. In fact, today the incredible success, let me say it this way, or the interest or focus that everyone is putting around this idea of how we manage the problem of being now 8 billion people in the planet, willing all to have a lot of comfort and find a way to do it without destroying the toy. This is the problem, so a problem of safeguarding the environment, having new values on how we manage our society and how we redistribute this comfort and wellness among us, and how we look at this in dynamically toward the new generation. Well, this problem, which is extremely complex, cannot certainly anymore be managed by a law. I mean, I make an example. The organic wine movement of the 70s, 80s, in fact, benefited of a privilege. They took the organic name, defined by law how you have to use it. It's extremely closed, and in a way they have found probably they have an easier life than we will have. So for sure, if we don't move very quickly in building up at the same time this culture and in a way the minimum rules on how to approach this issue, because we will never be able to, in a short amount of time, to create a specific only one standard for the globe, but we can for sure exclude what is unacceptable in a way. We can set boundaries for these approaches. We can make a ton of examples, but the main examples are, for example, as one was saying, the idea that there needs to be an holistic vision, a multi-pillar vision, the idea that we have always to imagine that sustainability is a complex thing and it cannot be approached and abused by just looking at a part of it. I mean, there are certainly a lot of ways in which we can be effective, and we can aim to get to a significant improvement. But it's because it's something, and it's something that we have to do very quickly. I was reading an article a few days ago. The number one, I would say, main Italian newspaper in 3 weeks' time was accounted to publish about 270 articles regarding sustainability in less than a month. This is what we're living today. This is so. In this moment, we are reaching the top of the confusion, and if we don't move quite quickly, we will lose really the opportunity to make the change that we were thinking about.
Thanks very much for that. I'm struck about your comment about the rules, but then moving to a culture. That it's the rules has to be where it starts because it helps people understand what they need to look at, but it then has to go through to this is a culture of the way we do things. And coming back to the point that Juan made about how weird it would now be to see someone smoking on an aeroplane. It's how does one make that shift? But coming now to you, Stefano, how do you go about getting, even within one country, within Italy, getting a standard and approach which can be universally or externally explained and visible, but at the same time is going to be able to represent the very different realities of winemaking in different regions. So how did the Qualitas develop? How do you sort of square that circle of, someone once said to me in one of the interviews I did for the process so far, the whole thing we like about wine is its specificity. We talk about the terroir and the weather and the soil and the drainage. And so why should standards be any different? So how do you square that circle in creating a standard?
Yeah, a very wide question, but I'll try to reply in 5 minutes. And first of all, thanks to Tom and Toby for having a Qualitas here, and thank you, Peter, also for trying to speak slowly, as I requested. We are very proud of being part of the Roundtable. Qualitas, as you said, is a certification scheme on sustainability in the wine sector, exclusively in the wine sector, an Italian-based act, and it is controlled by FederDoc. FederDoc is the union, the confederation of the PGIs in Italy of wine, and so basically we represent producers, and it is in the interest of producers to have a widely shared interpretation of sustainability. So that's why we are here. There are two main points that I want to focus on. The first is, well, let me introduce what is, in my opinion, a difference between a global standard and a global reference. So this is my interpretation, not necessarily yours. But when I talk about a global standard, I mean a certification scheme. So that implies a standard owner, what I call the integrity program, so set rules, how does it work, and so on. And in our view, and not because we are a standard owner, this is a chimera now. It's something that we can't reach, at least in the short term, because there are too many businesses involved, too many standard owners. Also, as you said, differences, regional differences. So why don't we head for, at first instance, a global reference? A global reference is something more than a guideline, is a shared definition of what a good standard should consider. Okay, and that is option number one in our opinion. So we are going for a global reference first, and then let's see what happens. So welcome back to planet Earth. No, sorry, I'm saying that because yesterday I was present at another Congress. It was on Italian sustainability, and the last slide was a question. So how long shall we wait for a global standard? And wow, so good, probably some years. The second point, as important as the first one, we do agree that the global reference should consider the multi-pillar approach, as Michele said, but I think that there is a point that is often underrated, and it's, again, I call it the integrity program. Maybe it's not the best definition, but the requirements are important. But you may have very good requirements, very complete requirements, but then what happens if there is no integrity program? If you as the standard owner has not set the rules to qualify the auditors. So how trained are the auditors? What is the duration of the audit? So how can we be sure that such great requirements are fulfilled? And I do expect this to be considered by the Roundtable within the global reference.
Here we go again. I think that's a very good point. I mean, there's no, if you've even got the best standard available, if it's not invigilated properly, then it falls away. But here you get to see some of the complexity within the process. That it's not just. I think when we started, we assumed it was going to be, more issues, more certificate, more oversight. But it's become more complicated. But I think it's good to have these discussions because it does start to get into some of this detail. So coming last and by no means least to Marcus from Sweden, who wasn't able to join our prep call yesterday, and then I was rash enough to say I think I know what he's going to say, and he's now going to try and surprise me, I think. So Marcus comes at this from the retail, if I may generalize, the retail end of the process. And you've done a lot of work in the area. So Marcus, over to you.
Thank you, Peter, for inviting me and Systembolaget to this very important discussion and panel about certifications and global reference standard. Systembolaget are the Swedish monopoly retailer for alcoholic beverages like wine, spirits and beer. And for us to take the full responsibility in terms of sustainability issues, we are about to take responsibility for the whole supply chain. That's what we are expected to do today. Maybe not 20 years ago, but today we are expected to do that. And one way to do that could be to have a direct contact with each and every producer behind what we have in the fixed assortment. We have more than 2,800 unique products. So for us to take the full responsibility would be to have a direct contact and engagement with each and every producer, and even more upstream with the grape growers in terms when we talk about wine. I guess you can imagine that is not really possible in terms of resources needed and the competence. So we are very happy to realize that there are sustainability schemes, standards, certifications out there for each and every origin that we can rely on, because we cannot do the work that Qualitas are doing in the field together with the producer. So we're very happy, but even though there are many similarities between all these certification schemes, you may also know that there are a big diversity between all these schemes. There are, areas that is covered by some of them, but some other areas is not covered. And that is a challenge in itself. So that is the reason why we 4 years ago now started a work to analyze and evaluate the coverage of all these certifications in terms of 17 different indicators, covering environmental issues like biodiversity, water, energy, climate, and also social issues like freedom of association, working hours, protection for young workers, etc., migrant workers. So what we have today is a result that we have full transparency. We are sharing these results with all kinds of stakeholders, and especially those standard holders out there behind the different schemes. And the reason for this evaluation is not to have a competition between the different schemes. That's not the purpose. The purpose is for us to use the information more systematically. So if you take Qualitas, for example, we can use Qualitas when we are doing risk analysis of the whole assortment, considering that products with Qualitas in place have a lower risk, both in terms of environmental, climate, and social issues. And that's very good for us, because we don't have to pinpoint or follow up those products having Qualitas in place. Or Sustainable Wines of New Zealand, another example. Having that in place, we don't need to follow up those products because we rely on the certification process and the coverage of that standard. However, in that sense, it's important for us to know what kind of indicators, what kind of risk areas are covered by each and every standard. As a bonus on that process, we have seen that there is a high willingness from the standard holders, from the certifications, to based on the result of this benchmark, to improve their weak spots, so to say. So if there is a certification for some specific origin, lacking focus on, for example, biodiversity or working hours, they have shown willingness to have a dialogue with us to improve these areas. And that is, we would not have expected that 4 years ago, but it's what's happening now. And we are very happy about that, because that is harmonization between all these certifications. And referring to this context, I would say that this benchmark that we have done with a third-party company conducting this comparison has been made with based on the Nordic monopolies, not only Systembolaget, but Alko in Finland, and Vinmonopolet in Norway, and Vinbudin in Iceland also. We have this collaboration. But I think in the context of Sustainable Wine Roundtable, we have the opportunity with a very, very important community and all the stakeholders now engaged in Sustainable Wine Roundtable to have an even higher impact and make even higher benefits for the certifications out there that will... So if we can do the same in Sustainable Wine Roundtable to create a global reference standard, not necessarily a global standard, but a global reference standard, making some kind of benchmark for each and every certification scheme out there, for them to see what they can improve in terms of harmonization between all the different schemes. I think the power between Sustainable Roundtable is multiple higher compared to the Nordic monopolies. So that is kind of the potential that I see in this group.
So no pressure there then for us. But I think the point you make is a good one, that also the extent to which it could be a collaborative approach rather than it being, those at the retail end slightly thumping the producing end. That's not necessarily going to be a very constructive approach. Right, we've now heard from our panel, and it's now time to hear from you lot. See if you're all awake. So does anyone have any questions that they want to raise of any of the panel? Yep, everyone's suddenly studying their shoes. In that case, I've got a couple of questions I'd like to sort of go back to the panel with. One of the issues that's come up from the standards we've looked at so far is the level of detail and guidance that some contain relative to others. The collective paperwork runs to several hundred pages, and in the case of others, it runs to 20, 30 pages. What's ideal? Looking at it from, for example, from the producer end, is it useful to be given very clear guidance about what to do? Or is sometimes that level of detail too much, given the perhaps specific issues you might face within even different parts of your vineyards, not necessarily the thing overall? Or alternatively, does too little detail imply a standard that, to come back to the point that was made by Stefano, does that just mean it's really not up to muster, that it's not strict enough, it's not providing sufficient guidance? So I'd like a view from the sort of producer end on that point.
I'll go first. I was part of the group of people that worked on developing a third-party sustainability certification for the state of Washington, which was launched in March of this year. It's called Sustainable Washington. We were using sustainability programs or certifications that were imported into Washington. Some growers were using California standards, Lodi rules, etc. Some producers were using Oregon standards, live and salmon safe. And so we finally put together one that was grown within the industry, for the industry. And shockingly enough, the common understanding of how detailed this certification has to be and how detailed the work has to be in order for you to be able to certify your, in this case, vineyard. It's just for grape growing so far. We're hoping to extend that into wineries in the near future. The grower community basically told us the more detail the documentation, the easier it will be for us not only to comply, but to make sure how far we are from being certified. Just the exercise of going through the certification process, the understanding how many steps we need to take and having clear notes on each one of those steps will help us understand how far we are from actually being certified, and then gauge how long it's going to take us to get to that certification, and then how long it's going to take us to improve upon that level, which is the minimum amount needed in order to be certified. I feel like the entire sustainability work is very complex, and it's going to take a while for us to be in a point in which we have a global reference that will allow us to know not if we are including what we need to include, but also, I think more importantly, a reference that will be an idea of if you are doing enough to be sustainable, if you're doing enough to continue to do what you're doing for years and years and years. And I think the more detailed the work, although tedious for the producer, the more detailed the work, the easier it will be for us to compare ourselves with the global reference, which is what I like about very detailed processes as it relates to certifying and maintaining your certification. Although I understand as a grower and a winemaker that it's a little tedious work, especially as it relates to paperwork. We don't like any of that, but we can improve on things that we don't measure. And in order for us to measure things, we need to write them down. I'm a big proponent of a lot of data.
Michele, how do you feel about that? Because an argument that's being put to me by some smaller producers is that too much detail leads precisely to too much paperwork. That, particularly for smaller vineyards, you might only have a management team of perhaps 3 or 4 people, and sustainability is what one of them does on a Thursday afternoon. So what's your view on squaring that circle of, Juan's comment about the more detail, you know what you're aiming at, versus does it just overwhelm?
First of all, I totally believe in the idea that we have to be very detailed in managing any criticity. That is very important because, and that's the work of the global reference, is to be sure to also provide a tool to the producer that allow him to say, I know that by approaching this way the job, I am fulfilling, and I'm credible, I'm reliable, and I can go and I can put my face in front of the consumer or whoever, saying it's the right way, because this is, and I think in this sense very detailed. But I'm believing in quantitativity. I think that we have to measure and we have to provide evidences. This is necessary. I believe in the third party verification. I think that we cannot imagine to any other way than, and again, because it's the same problem of reliability, credibility of what we are saying and doing. It's not only to be sure to exclude those who are abusing of it, but it's really to be sure that I can claim and do it again, putting the face behind it. But the issue that you're mentioning, small, fearing too much detail or quantitativity, I'm not so sure that's what they are afraid of. I'm not big at all, by the way, in terms of production. And I can tell you that, in fact, and I think that's what Juan was also mentioning, a clear framework which is structured and in a way detailed is the best way for a small producer to approach the product, because they have a real instrument. They don't have to create the instrument. It's not, in this sense, that was actually one of the challenges that we try to face as a Qualitas is we don't just provide a principle standard that you interpret by creating your manual and your structure manual, and then you run it yearly like it's a generical approach to quality and risk management standards. We tried to provide specific rules to address the wineries on how to really practically manage. And I think in this sense, in fact, the job, I'm going a little bit beyond the challenge of the sustainable roundtable. I'm talking about mainly about your question on on how detailed. Well, I think that in this sense, this is not probably a requirement that or a really critical goal of the SWR, but it is certainly a way to facilitate the work of the wineries to provide practical and detailed instrument on how to approach the problem.
Okay. We have a question. Far away.
Oh yeah, say who I am. America Loving. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer of Vintage Wine Estates. I wanted to just clarify in your question. I believe that you both answered how detailed a sustainability certification should be. And maybe this is for you, Peter. How detailed does a global reference standard have to be in order for the certifications to be able to meet up with that?
Well, that's rather why we have events like this, so that that I can find out what people actually think, because the conversations we've had so far, some would argue exactly as these two gentlemen here have, that having that level of detail provides, and I don't know why I'm saying it, perhaps because of the amount of Swedes in the room, but a bit like building an IKEA wardrobe. You've just got the instructions, then you just follow them, and you end up, well, hopefully, with a wardrobe. That's the theory anyway. And I take that point, but others have made the point that in other interviews that sometimes having an output-based approach is best. That you stipulate what the thing is you want to achieve, be that in terms of water management or pruning efficiency or whatever else it might be, and then it's up to the winery or the whoever's managing the vineyard to do it in a way that seems most appropriate to the circumstances they face in front of them, and that anything that's too detailed can potentially be descriptive in a way which isn't always helpful. So there's a
I guess I meant more that if the certification bodies are in between the producers and the reference standard for the global reference standard, does the global reference standard have to be so detailed, or can we leave that to the local certification bodies to add the detail that helps the vineyards?
I think it has to be the latter, because we can't possibly define something at a global level which is going to be applicable to California, to Italy, to Lebanon, to Romania, to wherever. I think what we can do is to say these are the things, these are the kind of the boxes that need to be covered, and enough detail about what the endpoints ought to be in each case. And then absolutely, that's where the meld with the standards is, which, coming back to the point that has been commented on already, which is why a global standard, it's not just that it's maybe many years off. I'm not actually sure it's feasible, because you're talking about such diversity in how wine is grown. But as long as we can be sure that even if those issues are, be that labor rights, be that freedom of association, be that use of water, be that use of energy, whatever it happens to, or carbon sequestration, that there's a list of these are the issues that need to be covered. Exactly how those things are addressed is up to the people on the ground and their certification standards to make sure that happens. I think any more is not, I don't think, feasible or practicable. But Stefano, you wanted to come in, I think.
Yeah,
I just wanted to add one thing, Stefano, I'm sorry. Is that, Peter, I don't think that you can imagine to solve your problem in just a few years. That's also a point, in the sense that I think we have in front of us different stages of this job. And probably at the first, we have a simple work to start with, which is defining a generic boundary on a framework to work with. But then we can face new challenges which can lead. We talked about it earlier in the. Tomorrow, why not to maybe global benchmarks and maybe even a unique, very detailed global standard. But it's so I think we just need to start and face different challenges. That was my addition. Sorry, Stefano.
And this morning you told me not to be too pessimistic, not in public at least. So no, but sorry, because I know it will be boring technical details, but as an insider, I found your question very interesting, and it's not something that we have been talking about recently. Some standards don't provide details, or maybe they do provide the so-called what good looks like. That is not compulsory, but it is an example. We have shifted to details with the qualitas. But my answer is that it depends on the quality of the details. And I'll make, an example. In the Qualitas standard, you will not find that fertilization is you have to fertilize or you don't have to fertilize. The requirement is that if you want to fertilize, you have to provide to the auditors a soil analysis, a leaf analysis, and or a visual analysis of the grapes. And this is very precise, but it is not a bond. So the company is free to choose, but if they choose, they have to demonstrate that they have objective evidence. So in the end, we are for details, but it depends on the quality of details, of course.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Where we're sort of getting to with the global reference standard is a sort of an apply or explain, which is effectively what you're saying there, which is that something's not necessarily mandatory, but if you're not doing it or you choose to do something differently, you have to explain why that's the case. And I think that sort of probably squares that circle at an operational level between sufficient detail to provide a IKEA cupboard template, but enough flexibility to allow individual growers to do what they would like if they think that's what's appropriate for them.
Yeah, sorry.
Marcus, do you have anything to bring on this one? Because
Yeah.
obviously you're in a situation where you're having standards which are, as you said at the beginning, looking very, very different. But yet you've got to try and explain to your buyers, your customers, how do these square? So how do you sit on this detail question?
Yeah, that's one of the challenges, of course, when we are trying to guide customers to more sustainable choices. We can't have all these different labels on the wall and trying to guide them. We need to do some work in between in terms of accepting and drawing a line for those standards who achieve a certain level of coverage and the level of details in terms of requirements, so that the customers can rely when we are saying that this is a sustainable product that is highlighted on the shelter in our stores. We need them to rely on that, because otherwise we will not be able to communicate in the future. So that's very important. But I think the whole thing is not a question of finding and develop the scientifically perfect standard in detail, because there's no answer to that. It's a philosophical question. So I think the whole thing is to find consensus in the wine business among all the stakeholders, including the consumers. So, and trying to achieve that level of consensus that we need to reach to, I don't think the approach, the successful approach would be to from the top to the bottom, define in detail what is the perfect standard, trying to replace all the good work that has been developed in different standards out there for different origins. I think it's rather a way to find more and more step-by-step consensus among the standard holders, trying to, with use of a global reference standard on a high level, define these areas are crucial for you to claim that you have a sustainable standard covering all these issues. So I think that is giving the direction of more harmonization, but based on all the good work that is done out there. I mean, if you take, for example, the European community, we don't have one common country for Europe. We have different countries, but we have lots of similarities in terms of regulations and things like that. That's very beneficial. And you have the same situation in the States. And I think that might be the good solution for the future in terms of sustainability standards too, at least in the near future, to have more and more common vision and focus in terms of the high-level coverage of different impact areas, but building on all the innovation and creativity that we see out there. And I think it's important to point out also is that I think it's an iterative process. So it's not about defining now and forever the sustainability standard. It's a process that will be ongoing for decades, where we have the collaboration between maybe Sustainable Wine Roundtable and all the retailers and different stakeholders and the certifications out there, because there is so much innovation going on, and that will be also we will see so many examples in the future that we in Sustainable Wine Roundtable will not be able to replace in our processes. So I think it's a collaboration that is kind of the answer for the future.
Yes, let's not talk about the EU because of Brexit. So let's just drop that one on the grounds that we used to think that we had things in common, but then some idiots decided that they thought differently. So let's park that one. Question there.
No, it's like I just wanted a little bit to share my view, because I see like producer part and then like sorry, I'm from Portugal. I'm a consultant in technology for the industry. So what I see, it's a little bit of a problem in production, and then a problem in at the end with the consumer decision. What I believe is like my standards for sustainability might be different from your standards. So I think there is a level like an handicap system, like in golf, for example, that allows that each people will look at the different ways of different levels of sustainability. So what I believe that could be a good solution, it's transparency, that everyone talks, but no one shares information at the end, you know. So yesterday I was listening to a sustainable wine roundtable speech, and they're talking about the collection of data, you know. So at the end, you know, like we need at the production collect the most data as possible, the most detailed possible, because we have to give the flexibility for in the future the consumer decide which data they want to look. If I want to look at water, I can look at water and decide my sustainability because I'm focused on water. If I'm focused on all other issues of carbon footprint, etc., it's my decision as a consumer to have the access to this information and to say, okay, in the moment that I'm consuming, I say I prefer this versus I prefer this instead of that product because of the information that I have access to. So I think like from what I've been hearing these past days, it's like the transparency is there, the idea of transparency, but no one really is transparent. So no one, like I don't see the work of a certification in the future while you have the transparency between the consumer and the producer, and have all the information like flowing directly from one side to the other one, and the consumer is deciding exactly where he wants to look at to decide the moment of consume. So that's what I wanted.
Yeah,
Marcus.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry.
That's a very good question, and I think to some extent we should listen to the consumer and use the power of the consumers, but there is also a certain amount of responsibility that we need as a retailer, as a producer. We need to take the responsibility to be in line with the science, the science. So we cannot only rely on the perceptions of the consumers, what they think is today is sustainability, and maybe tomorrow there are other things, because we also need to be fully in line with the science and rely on the science to take the responsibility that the consumer does not expect us to do, because that is needed in order to meet all the challenges that we have related to sustainability, like climate issues and things like that. So I think it's a balance. That's.
Anyone else have comment to pass on that? Stefano?
Yeah, well, thanks a lot for your frank comment. Of course, it's not because I represent a certification scheme, but I strongly disagree with your view. I mean, in a sense, I agree, because in the perfect world, the best political system is anarchy if everybody behaves in a proper way. So We have transparency rules in our scheme, so communication is part of the social pillar, and so communication must be transparent, but at least we have auditors that check that communication is transparent. So in the perfect world, probably we can rely on the producers, but if nobody's checking and with the so wide and unsure interpretation of sustainability, we do think that certification is needed.
Yeah, and let me add that we are risking to miss an opportunity if we don't do something anyway, which now we're here to understand what. Because the problem is that we have, on the one hand, consumers that since already they're monitored in the last 15 years as being ready to consume more products which have more values in general, that are willing to pay more for those products. So that's something that we're clearly, I remember a 4 years ago conference where we were putting together numbers of cross-border between Europe and the US, assessing that there was a category already of wines that were considered in a way sustainable, that was growing 8% instead of being steady, or many examples like this that are showing that there is a potential that is not expressed, that can have the result to change the things that we were mentioning before, so to make things be better for planet and society. So I think that this is also something that we have to have clear in mind, that things are not working well enough. And so we need to find a way to filter better the communication, the way and the way products are made, and to have to give the possibility to make this change happen, because it's not happening. And then again, I repeat, in this moment, the abuse is also the great risk that we are encountering. It is a moment in which we are seeing products that say, okay, this bottle which is made in a plant using carbon with near slavery in its value chain, but this cap is 5% recycled, and I am more sustainable. And in fact, consumer, we don't even know if they believe. But for sure we are risking to lose a momentum of interest, and at the same time to lose the trust not only of the consumer, even of the producer, who says, why should I invest in this direction if there is such a confusion and I don't know where to go? So for sure we have to do something. So I think that we are in the right place if we talk and together as a community try to rise the level of this culture.
Do you?
I think your point it's very well taken, and I think it's part of the mission of the Sustainable Wine Roundtable is to bring us all together so we can solve the issue. I see two different fuels fueling the fire that is our work on sustainability. One is driven by the consumer. The consumer, it's expecting of us to be sustainable, right? And in that case, I think our job is to distill our messaging and make it easier for them to understand, yes, the wines that he makes are sustainable, and it will be possible for him to make wine for generations to come. On the other hand, I think it's being sustainable, it's the right thing to do, like the only way forward. And in that case, in order for us to participate in being broad in our participation, we need standards that define clearly what is it that we need to do in order to make it into the future. And I thought your comment was great, and I think we need both of the things that you were asking for, both letting the consumer know very succinctly, this is what this winery is doing to be sustainable, but in the other hand, do the work behind to actually be sustainable in a meaningful way and following the science as it dictates through a certification, which I think it's two big challenges ahead of us, among other challenges, but sustainability, it's complex.
Leads on to a question about what the wine sector can learn from sustainability standards in other sectors. It was a point you made in your opening remarks, that standards have been around for a while and that hasn't necessarily always improved performance in certain areas. You know, that despite 20 years of programs in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana on cocoa, child labour still exists. So I guess a last question to you as a panel is what can we, developing a global reference standard in wine, what can we, good and bad, learn from how sustainability and the use of standards has and has not worked in other sectors? So just very quick remarks from each of you to close the panel. Juan, start with you.
I think Marcus said it earlier. The key is that every certification evolves as we learn more about sustainability and how impactful we are to our environment and the community where we are. We should evolve to make the certification better and to make the certification work to what's best for the community and the place where we are.
Michele?
Well, I think we do have to. I'm just adding this idea that we need to also make some exclusions. I think this needs to be also a perspective. We need to start filtering. So we have to also tackle between the generic, the evolution, the positive, the propositive approach, but to also try to set some limits, and so even though I repeat, I think it's going to be a work of main steps. So there's going to be different stages of this work that need to be a long term, has to have a necessarily long term vision. But we need to start also with some limits and boundaries.
Yeah, I think we can learn a lot from other issues, subjects. I often quote the Global Food Safety Initiative. It's a kind of sustainable wine roundtable working on food safety. So they developed a kind of global reference, and only a few standards are admitted, and there is mutual recognition between them. So on mutual recognition we should work. So it's maybe not just one standard, a few ones, but with mutual recognition.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a question of the mechanism behind eco-labeling in general. I think it's important not to make the certification process too easy. It should not be like 98% of the business that has been certified, because then it will die. There will be no dynamic movement in that set of requirements. So I think a good program would include a kind of self-assessment. You could get on board, you can get guidance, you can share of experiences and practices. But if you go to the next step of certification, it should be pretty tough. It should be like being able for like 30-40% at maximum of the businesses. If you reach like 70-80%, I think it's time to revise the requirements, because otherwise you will lose the dynamic of continual improvement. And that the continual improvement is kind of the key to reach what we need to reach to save the planet.
No, I think that makes a huge amount of sense. You see the amount of issues even the last couple of years that have come onto the agenda, you know, GHG sequestration, regen agriculture, you know, all of these new expressions that even 3 or 4 years ago were not in common circulation. And I like the point about if the bar gets to the stage where lots of people can jump it, the bar's perhaps not high enough. I also do like the conclusion of the panel, which is that we're going to be at this for some time, which, given that we get paid for that, is a jolly good thing. So thank you very much, gentlemen. But joking aside, I would like to thank all of you very, very much indeed for some really, really useful and insightful comments. As I said at the beginning, it's good to have within SWR extremely, not just good organizations, but within those organizations, really fabulous people. And it's you know, it's quite a pleasure to work with people who can argue back, know what they're talking. It really is great fun to do. So thank you very much indeed to all of you for your comments, and thanks to those of you from the audience who made your comments, and thank you for coming, and enjoy the rest of the day.
I